I don't expect this to be a long video, but it is the third and, at least for now, final concept I'd like to establish as a baseline for talking about RPGs. We touched on this in the last video, but essentially I want to talk about the firmness of reality in the games that we run. And the analogy I'm going to use to describe this is brick game mastery versus Play-Doh game mastery. Much like with the gaming analysis triangle, I'm not going to argue that brick or Play-Doh one is better than the other. However, you will find that it does kind of line up. Brick tends to be more in the gamist simulationist area, and then Play-Doh tends to be more of a narrativist tendency. So if you do have a preference with those, I think you'll find yourself pushed toward one of these preferences. But instead, I'm going to explain the difference between them and sort of how they both come into play in all of your games. And look, I actually kind of regret even connecting it to the gaming analysis triangle, so let's just forget that whole thing happened. So let's look at some examples. Scenario 1, the apparating treasure. A rogue is searching a room in a dungeon, and they're looking for treasure. The GM has the rogue make an investigation roll or a perception roll, and the rogue rolls a natural 20. Now, in the GM's notes, he knows there is no treasure in that room in the dungeon. However, the rogue did roll a 20 and the GM wants to reward that, and so the GM considers just having a small pittance of coins appear for the rogue to find. Should the GM choose to let the rogue find the gold, that is a Play-Doh call. Should the GM choose to stick to their guns and say no, there's no treasure in the room, that is a brick call. Scenario 2, Quantum Ogres. This scenario actually comes to us via Justin Alexander's amazing blog that I will link in the comments of this video. We have a GM who's laid out a scenario, and for the pacing of that scenario, they want the players to go through a forest, first encounter a group of kobolds, and then fight and defeat them, and then encounter a group of ogres, and then fight and defeat them. Foolishly, this GM has placed two paths in the woods, one leading to the kobolds and one leading to the ogres. And the players choose to go to the one leading to the ogres. The GM now has a call to make. They could swap them. They could move the kobolds into that position and therefore force the players to encounter them in the correct order. Swapping the monsters is a Play-Doh call. The ogres both existed and did not exist in the room until the players observed it and forced one reality to take place. And then, of course, the brick call would be, no, they find the ogres first and then the kobolds. Okay, I hope these two examples have made it clear what I'm talking about, and I think a lot of you probably think I'm dunking on Play-Doh GM calls, which to an extent I am. But here's the thing, Play-Doh calls can be appropriate, and they're certainly well-intentioned. Consider, for example, this scenario. Scenario 3, the overtuned fight. The GM has put a unicorn encounter in his adventure, because unicorns suck and should always be placed as antagonists. The players are fighting the unicorn, and the GM realizes, oh no, even though the players have behaved in a tactically optimal manner, they are going to lose this fight and the unicorn is going to kill them. So to fix this, the GM considers quietly changing the unicorn's hit points behind the screen to make it so the players will succeed at the fight. If the GM goes through with this and reduces the unicorn's hit points, that is a Play-Doh call. If the GM holds the line and lets the unicorn party wipe the players, that is a brick call. This is a case where I think most people would agree that the Play-Doh call is the correct one, although maybe that's just my own biases showing. Whatever the case, let's jump into the implications of this brick versus Play-Doh GMing philosophy. In an earlier video, I said that if your players do something indefensibly stupid, it's because you, the GM, have failed to communicate the situation to them correctly. I stand by that, and in fact, I think it's important to emphasize that the GM is the only mooring to reality that the players have. This is useful not only in assigning blame for when something crazy happens, but it's also a useful study in how communication between the GM and the players should work. Okay, for this next example, I'm going to assume you're actually watching this video and not listening to it in another tab. So go ahead and look at this room, look at the room behind me. Look how messy it is. And if you're the GM, you might describe this room in a couple ways. You'd say, there's a torn up leather chair that Strudel is sitting in. There's some Dungeons and Dragons books stacked on his desk, and a bunch of Star Wars minis line the shelf. See, there you use the 3 things rule, which is awesome and we haven't talked about yet, but good for you. Good job, you, he said, complimenting himself. So that was a decent room description, and it gave a reasonably clear picture of what was going on, at least in this corner. So after that, your players sort of have three objects they can anchor with: the chair, the books, and the minis. Let's say one of the players heads over to the shelf and says, well, I go and pick up a General Grievous mini. You, the GM, can then make a call. The brick call is there is no General Grievous mini because Strudel has self-respect and he does not play separatists in Star Wars Legion. Or you could go Playdough and say, okay, you have a General Grievous mini now. Here's the thing though, you the GM might not even have known whether or not there was a General Grievous mini on the shelf. It might not have occurred to you to think about it. So when the player asks about it, you have to ask, well, is it important whether there's a General Grievous mini there? And if the answer is no, it's not important, then certainly you should take the advice from modern RPG books and default to yes. Now, of course, now you know there's no General Grievous mini there, but you didn't before. Or maybe you did. Maybe you've been here. Okay, now that we sort of have that ambiguity planted into your mind, I want to jump to a fourth scenario. Scenario 4, the mystery. The GM has put together a whodunit, where the local paladin has killed the local priest, and the players need to solve the crime of who did it. The players go interview witnesses, they gather clues, and then the investigator, or the inquisitive rogue if you prefer, explains to the party how all the clues clearly point to the mayor is the guilty party. Now, the GM knows that the paladin is the guilty party, but when they listen to the rogue's explanation, they go, oh my, they have a point there. And so the GM has two options at this point. They can say, no, actually, the bloody scrap you found, it was not at the blacksmith, it was at the chapel. Hey, it's me from the future. I've got different clothing on and different lighting because I recorded this later. It is not clear from what I said in that video, but this is talking about when the players lay out the evidence, the GM is realizing that the evidence they put there does not actually point to the correct criminal. So the players are like, oh no, we think it's the mayor, and that's correct. Like the mayors have correctly... the mayors. So in this case, we're talking about when the GM builds a mystery and inadvertently the evidence they gave the players actually does implicate the mayor. Like this represents a GM mistake, similar to the overtuned fight we talked about earlier in the video. Anyway, back to old me with older clothing and better lighting. Or they can just go with it and say, yeah, the mayor is the murderer. I mean, they wouldn't say that to the players, but they would quickly alter their notes to say that the mayor is the murderer. Now, I didn't say there which option was brick and which was Playdough because you probably noticed that both options were Playdough. You could argue that one was more Playdough than the other, and one was a retcon, but again, we are messing with the existing reality in order to fix the scenario. That's Playdough. And this is where Playdough is such a powerful tool and why I don't think that brick truists, brickists? Bric-a-bracs? People like me who really favor brick calls, this is why I think we can't just cast out the idea of using Playdough calls altogether. Okay, but let's look at the scenario in another way. Let's say that the rogue makes this passionate argument that the mayor is the guilty party, but the GM reviews what the rogue said and knows that no, the clues really do point to the paladin. In that case, you do have a brick and a Playdough call. If it would be cooler to have the mayor be the culprit, then the Playdough call would be, yeah, it was actually the mayor. If it would be still cooler to have the brick do it, or just the GM wants to stick to their own notes, then you stick to it. You say, no, the murderer was the paladin, and you let the players go falsely accuse the mayor and let the scenario progress from there. I don't want to argue that one of those is more correct than the other. In that situation, I think I would always elect brick and let the paladin continue to be the murderer. But I can see arguments for why you would want to make the murderer the mayor at that point. So with all that said, I feel like you'll intuitively understand that there is no such thing as a purely brick GM. No amount of prep will get you ready to describe every single little nook and cranny of the world that the players are going to explore. However, I do believe that every GM has anchor points, things that they are not willing to change in the setting, and to determine if you're more of a bricky GM would be determine the number and breadth of those anchor points, whereas a Playdough GM is going to be much more flexible on more things. If you've been a GM for a while, it's probable you've done what is close to a pure Playdough session, where for whatever reason you didn't have a lot of time to prep or just chose not to prep, you relied on your improv skills, and hopefully you and your players had a really good time. Even there, though, that probably wasn't a pure Playdough session because not all prep takes place before the session and on pencil and paper. And certainly when you started the session, you said something and sort of guided it onto, I don't want to say the rails, but you sort of guided how the session would progress. And so I don't think you have pure brick or pure Playdough GMs. As with the previous two videos, I'm really not trying to push you in one direction or the other. I just think we need to be more intentional and understanding about the choices we're making as game masters. And so if you have been more of a Playdough GM, I encourage you, try a brick session. Stick to knowing exactly how many gold coins are in the dungeon and where they are, and stick to your guns on that. And if you're more of a brick GM, consider doing a more loosey-goosey session where you just have an outline and fall back on your improv skills a bit. You'll probably learn more about yourself as a game master and more about your players' preferences. You might even find a new style of play. That's what happened to me. I was very much an improv-only GM for many years. And then after reading some articles, I was like, no, I want to try doing a brick session. And I loved it, and I haven't really looked back. So it's a great way to sort of explore yourself, explore what these games are capable of, and enhance your game as a result. One resource for heavily brick GMs who want to look into another improv style but are scared about just relying entirely on their improv skills is I would look at the Lazy Dungeon Master's Guide and the Return of the Lazy Dungeon Master. I think is the second one. I'll put links in the comments of this video. It's by Mike Shea, Sly Flourish. Brilliant work, and I think it is an excellent way to inspect yourself as a game master, and also when you want to prepare for a session very quickly, it's a fantastic resource for doing that. It's definitely more of a Play-Doh style, but give it a try. You'll probably like it. Anyway, that's all for now. I'm looking forward to dive into more specific topics in the next videos, and I'll see you soon. Bye!